Good morning, friends and brethren. So very good to see you today. We have a good number with us today and some visitors. We're happy to see you here with us. Before we get into the lesson, a couple of things I want to just share with you. There have been a lot of people involved making some preparations today for this Elders Appreciation Dinner. It's something that has kind of been organized and worked with the does and keepers and the bucks for the last 2 or 3 years that I know of. And look forward to that. It's a good way to teach our young people about service, serving others, and an opportunity to teach them about our elders as well. And so there have been some who had asked, and so I want to address this. It's like it's not a gathering for everybody this evening. It is the does and keepers who are coming and who are helping to serve, and a lot of mama's been involved in fixing food, and for our elders and their wives. So that's what's happening this evening. Maybe there'll be some pictures later on of the event that we can share with everyone tonight. And I wanted to share with you as well some things that we've done regarding supporting needy saints. There have been a number of times. Ben, this is not the one. Oh, yes, it is. Ben, you're good. You're good. I'm not good. That's the problem. There have been a number of times that we have sent relief to Christians in Africa. Last year, a number of times to Zimbabwe. This year, we have sent both to Zimbabwe and to Zambia. And these are areas that you have sent me preaching, and areas I'm familiar with. Generally, Zimbabwe is not in a need, but the drought is affecting them this year in ways that it has not before. And so most recently, we've sent twice this year already. Most recently, we've sent to Zambia, the country there on the top, and around the blue circle, that's the area of Livingston. And there are 3 churches there specifically that we sent to help care for the saints there who are in need. Earlier this year, we sent to Zimbabwe, the blue circle down toward the bottom, to an area out in the bush. Relief went to 6 or 7 churches there. And so this year, relief that we have sent has affected somewhere in the neighborhood of 500 families, giving them some relief with food. In Zambia, we sent the relief through Amos Samoli. He's one of the men we support. You see his reports out there in the hallway or on email. And in Zimbabwe, through Thando Nubi, one of the preachers that I work with there a lot. And so this is the receipt. They've sent me so many pictures, I can't show them all. But just a couple of pictures here of the food bags. This is cornmeal, as we would call it. It's like a mealie meal is what they call it. And they make their staple diet out of that. These are 25 kg bags, which for some families would last about a month or so. And maybe for a small family, maybe longer than that. And some of those who are receiving that. And so when we send to try to keep track of where's this money going, we need some accountability back, right? And so they'll send pictures of the receipts, like when they buy the mealie meal. And so we can see that almost all of the money we send is going directly for buying food for these Christians. There are some that's being used for the transportation, getting it there, not by Leonard on his bike. That's not paid transportation. But when it's taken out farther into the bush, you have to rent a bucky, or buy fuel to be able to get it out to those places. And so I just wanted to share that with you, that we have sent around $3,500 this year so far, and we sent 4 or 5 times last year as well. And I just wanted to share that with you, and so that you are reminded of some of the things that we are doing collectively. There are individuals that have helped in ways too, and I'm appreciative for that, but I just wanted to share that with you. So we are familiar with this biblical term, disciple. We find it 29 times in the New Testament. Now, if we look at disciples, well, that's an additional 246 times that we see the word used. And so collectively, we are generally speaking about those who are followers of Jesus. That's who is being referenced when we see those words being used. Now, the very first disciples that we read about came from very diverse backgrounds. But in time, they found commonality. Their commonality was in the teaching of the Lord. And in fact, even they had camaraderie one with another because of the one whom they followed, the one who had influenced them, the one who taught them. a new way of life. And it was to them originally that Jesus said some very simple words. He said to them, "Follow me." And there were those who followed him. And these were the ones who first became learners of Jesus. So the process of learning in the day of Jesus was very relational. It was personal. It was upfront and personal. And so literally, the word disciple describes one who is a learner, one who is following a master teacher. And so it was a word understood very well. It was a common word used in biblical times. I have a feeling that an ancient university looked very different from a modern one. That schools of old that I can see and read about, the way teaching took place was different than what we are most familiar with. In contrast, in the Western era, students might find themselves in an auditorium with 300 other students. And that's not very personal. That's not very relational with regard to having a relationship with the teacher. But I think in biblical times, in ancient times, it was a little different than that. That those who were students followed very closely the master teacher. And it was a very up close and personal. Maybe there was only 5 or 6 students that watched him and walked with him, listened to him. They followed very closely the master teacher, and they were trying to emulate and learn by watching him, by listening to him. And so it may have been that when he went to the marketplace that they were there too. And they were seeing how he interacted with people and how he discussed things with them. And when he transacted business, they were there. And they were seeing those things. So they listened and they weighed carefully the thoughts of their master. Someone said discipleship meant much more than just the transfer of information. It referred to imitating the teacher's life, learning his values, and reproducing his teaching. And I think that's very true. I think that's descriptive of what it was to be a disciple following a teacher in ancient times. And so when Jesus called followers, those who would be his disciples, that was the very idea. That they would hear the things that he would say. They would understand his teachings. And that they would maybe even use some of the same words he did. And they would watch how he interacted with those who were friends and foes. And they would learn from those things. So being that master teacher involved transferring knowledge and skills and principles that would become a notable part of the student's life. The manner in which he spoke. I almost imagine that there were some things that the students would say just like the teacher. I think that's true because I've come to realize as years went on, I say some things like my auto shop teacher said back in high school. I use some of the same phrases that he used. And I think about some of the men that have been so very special to me, who have mentored me and taught me. I find myself sometimes when I'm teaching, I'll say something and I'll think, that's just the way Joe Corley would say it. Or I'll say something and I'll think, that's what Sewell taught me. And so you learn from teachers, and sometimes we become like them. And I've wondered if that's what Paul was referring to when he was facing an angry mob in Jerusalem. In fact, the soldiers had to come and rescue him. And he asked for an opportunity to stand on the stairs there inside the temple so he could address the crowd. And he said to them, I was brought up in this city at the feet of Gamaliel. And he was trying to win some confidence from them because they knew Gamaliel. And they respected his teaching as a rabbi of the Jews. And I'm sure that maybe he was hoping that they would not only remember Gamaliel, but maybe even remember some things that Paul has said before. And they would have thought, well, that's the way the teacher would have said it. And I know Paul was hoping to encourage a kinder audience, one that would maybe let him tell them about his conversion to Jesus. Being a disciple begins with following the teacher. And it's like we said earlier on, Jesus said some very simple words. In John chapter 1, verse 43, here's what he said. The following day, Jesus went into Galilee, and he found Philip, and he said to him, follow me. I mean, it was simple words, But at that point, it meant enough to Philip where it turned him to follow Jesus. I want you to turn with me to the book of Matthew, chapter 4. Here, just looking briefly at some phrases that Jesus said, and opening up the accounts here, a little bit of some teaching. In Matthew chapter 4, you remember when Jesus called the 4 fishermen. We start reading in verse 18. And Jesus, walking by the sea, saw 2 brothers, Simon called Peter, and Andrew his brother, casting a net into the sea, for they were fishermen. And he said to them, "Follow me, and I will make you fishers of men." And they immediately left their nets and followed him. And going on from there, he saw 2 other brothers, James, the son of Zebedee, and John his brother, in the boat with Zebedee, their father, mending their nets. And he called them. And immediately they left the boat and their father and followed him. Pretty simple, really, the calling that he gave. But it was that call, follow me. Look at chapter 9. Chapter 9, there's some other instances too. We're just looking at just 3 or 4 here. Chapter 9, verse 9. And as Jesus passed on from there, he saw a man named Matthew sitting in the tax office. And he said to him, "Follow me." And he arose and followed him. Chapter 16. Chapter 16 and verse 24. And Jesus said to his disciples, "If anyone desires to come after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me." And here, just the very simple truth is, Jesus did the calling. And there were those who were listening to the words and the teaching of Jesus that when he called, it meant something to them. It spurred them on to respond, to follow him. And in chapter 16, we also see that sometimes you had to pay a price with that. That to follow Jesus did not come easy. Sometimes there were some difficulties that came with that. There was a price to pay. That they would have to give up, as he's saying in chapter 16, they would have to give up on their own ambitions and desires and take on the will of the Lord. It came at a price. The uncommitted are not going to make it. Jesus said so. The uncommitted are not going to make it. That's what Jesus said. And those early disciples, those who were devoted to Jesus, those who were willing to follow Jesus and to stay with him, though there was opposition that became great, they grew to be more like him. Even though there was opposition, or maybe because there was opposition, they grew to be more like him. We become known by those we follow, or those we try to be like. Sometimes that's a good thing. Sometimes not so much. Because it depends who we follow and who we are trying to be like. But we're looking at those who are looking to follow Jesus, to be his disciples, to be learners and followers of Jesus. Think again, about how Paul appealed to his training in the law when he made reference to Gamaliel, or how, in fact, he was trained. Just referencing this thought, brought up in this city, he said, at the feet of Gamaliel, taught according to the strictness of our father's law, and was zealous toward God as you all are today. Paul said in Acts 22 and in verse 5. The purpose of following such a teacher was to be influenced by him. And that's what Paul is relating. And when we study the life of Paul, we see and understand how he had been taught and how he had learned from Gamaliel. But of course, what he was trying to share with the people then is how he had been moved by the teaching of Jesus, and how his thinking had changed, and how now he had been conformed to the teaching of Jesus, the Son of God. Christian discipleship speaks to the idea of a relationship with the master teacher. It's personal. It's relational. We're talking about Jesus, the one sent by God. Jesus said this, "A disciple is not above his teacher, but everyone who is perfectly trained will be like his teacher." Luke chapter 6 and verse 40. In fact, we will become more like him if we listen to him. If we have regard for his teaching and we listen to his teaching, we will become more like him. So much so that people would see that in us. And the point is, too, that Jesus is calling us to be like him. Just like he called those early disciples when he said, "Follow me," he's still calling. He is still calling us to be his people. Following Jesus and adhering to his way of life allows his teaching to shape one's view of life to be like his. That we are changed, that we become more like him. But even that, in time, we become teachers to others because others see him in us. I want you to turn to Acts chapter 4. Acts chapter 4. Following Jesus and adhering to his way becomes so very evident and so very clear by the time we get to Acts chapter 4. Oh, there's been a lot that has happened in the book of Acts to bring us to this point. Those who have become baptized believers in Jesus because they were convicted of the preaching about Jesus being the Son of God, the resurrected Son of God who ascended to heaven. And now the apostles, in particular here, Peter and John, we see are facing some conflict by the Jewish leaders, those who are opposing some things that they have to say. But the evidence that many were being influenced and changed by Jesus was mounting. Acts chapter 4, verse 1. "And as they spoke to the people, the priests, the captain of the temple, and the Sadducees came upon them, being greatly disturbed that they taught the people and preached through Jesus the resurrection from the dead." So here's what they were doing, those early disciples. They were preaching Jesus, and it was having a great effect. There were those who were becoming baptized believers in Jesus Christ. But the Jewish leaders were not happy about that. They're not denying what's going on, but in fact it's because of what is going on that they are taking a position. Verse 3, "And they laid hands on them and put them in custody until the next day, for it was already evening. However, many of those who heard the word believed, and the number of men came to be about 5,000. And so disciples of the Lord, those baptized believers in chapter 2, those added to his church, growing in number. You know, the teaching of Jesus when he has said to those early disciples, "Follow me," has increased now. And it's some of those early disciples who are the teachers now. And there are those who are still being encouraged to follow him. And many are. And it has certainly caught the attention of these Jewish leaders to some concern on their part. The preaching about Jesus was a repeated story. And when they were taken and away and they're going to be told to stop preaching, of course, but they don't stop. So they start preaching again when they were asked in verse 7, "By what power or by what name have you done this?" Verse 8, "Then Peter, filled with the Holy Spirit, said to them, 'Rulers of the people and elders of Israel, if we this day are judged for a good deed done to the helpless man, by what means he has been made well, let it be made known to you all and to all the people of Israel that by the name of Jesus Christ of Nazareth, whom you crucified, whom God raised from the dead, by him this man stands here before you whole. This is the stone which was rejected by you builders, which has become the chief cornerstone. Nor is there salvation in any other, for there is no other name under heaven given among men by which we must be saved.'" And we read that just to be reminded of the events that are unfolding, to be reminded of the conviction of those who were teaching these things, Peter and John and the other apostles, the other disciples who were so convinced of the help and the salvation in Jesus Christ that even when persecution becomes greater in Acts chapter 8 and they were scattered to other parts of the world, they went preaching and teaching Jesus Christ. But here's to the point in chapter 4. This point just stands out to me, evidence that is overwhelming. In verse 13, now when they saw the boldness of Peter and John, and perceived that they were uneducated and untrained men, they marveled. And they realized that they had been with Jesus. I love that passage. It is incredibly powerful to me as a testament to those early disciples that their lives were now so changed that others could see Jesus in them. You know, we become known by those we follow or those we try to be like. People have an influence on us. We see that in so many trends. It's in the way we dress sometimes. It's whatever's trending in the world. It's the way we get our hair cut. You know, sometimes it's those new styles. You like my new style? No, it doesn't change. You know, but people are moved sometimes by these, whatever's happening around us. And sometimes there are those who come along who have influence by the things they do and the things they say. And sometimes we start talking like them. Well, if what they're saying is right and godly, that's fine. But sometimes we are influenced by things we shouldn't be influenced by. And what we see with these early disciples, that in fact, yes, they were influenced, but they were influenced by the master teacher. They'd become more like him. They were his followers. And they were living him in their lives. And it was so evident that it could not be denied. And they realized that these had been with Jesus. Undeniable. Those stayed in the Word and did the things that he called them to do. It was undeniable. And they lived for him, sometimes at great cost, denying themselves and submitting to him. It was undeniable. And these would not be quickly moved away from their teacher. That becomes undeniable as well. And so we have to think. We have to just stop and think about this. What does it take to have that kind of faith and devotion to the Lord? Well, in one way, Jesus said this in a very simple way in Matthew 22, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your mind. Matthew 22, verse 37. And in some ways, he's saying, like, you know, you're totally in or you're totally out. There's no in between. And it's a choice that we have to make too. We're totally in or we're totally out. Which will it be? There were many others who came along and were interested in Jesus. We can read about that throughout the Bible story. Some who became quick disciples, but just as quickly there were some who turned away. There were those who thought the teaching of Jesus was just too hard. John chapter 6 is one of those passages. There were those who said, but these things are too hard, and they turned and they walked away from him, though they had been his followers. It's not easy to be devoted to him. Remember, Jesus said that. It comes at a cost that we have to take up our cross and follow him. It comes at a cost. And many are the distractions that take away the focus of true discipleship. You know, there are choices in life about the way we live and the things that we do. And sometimes those choices become very hard and even cloudy on what is right or what is best. But the survivors, the ones who remain as followers of Jesus, are those who are totally committed to him. That much I'm sure of. That much we know. But now, all of that being said, as a preface to bring us to this point and this question, the bigger issue and the greater purpose of this lesson, the issue is not only what does it take for us to find faith and devotion to the Lord, but how do we instill that desire in our children? What should we do? Or what must we do? I don't know of a greater concern for disciples of Jesus who are raising children than to think about their souls and our desire for them to serve God. And sometimes we wonder, what do we do? What must we do so they have the greatest opportunity to know and understand the way of the Lord and choose to follow him, to choose to be his disciples? If we are the teacher and they are the student, what are they learning from us? I think there's our starting point. You know, what are we teaching our children about discipleship to the Lord? I mean, these that we look at in ancient times, those who are disciples or those who are not, becomes very clear. The distinction is very clear. And the evidence of those who are truly disciples, even when pressed because of their faith, becomes very clear that their faith is true and strong, and they don't change, they don't back down. What do our children see in us, and what are they learning from us? When they hear the way we talk, when they hear the things we talk about, when they see the things we do, and they see the choices that we make in life, when they see how we make priorities and what they are, what do our children learn from us? Because they're watching us, and they're listening to us, and they are learning from us. And because they are watching us, it should give us pause to stop and really think about what they are seeing. Somewhere in the archives of 87,000 pictures and photo albums in our house, because there was a day when you took pictures and you put them in these books, that you could look at later. Remember how old people did that? And somewhere back in some of those albums, there's a picture in there somewhere of Stacy when she was about 2 years old. And this sticks out in my mind for several reasons. I come home from work one evening, and Stacy was in our bedroom, and she had somehow managed to put on my boots. I wear boots, most of you know, and they were about half as big as she was. And not only did she manage to put them on, they were not too small for her. They were easy for that part, but somehow she had managed to stand up. And she said something like, "Look, Daddy, I'm like you." And it was kind of funny and cute, and at the same time, it scared me to death. I've remembered that for a lot of years. It scared me to death. It was one of those moments where it kind of sinks in that you have someone walking in your shoes who sees the things you do and hears the things you say, and it makes you stop and think, what am I doing? And how am I teaching? We want our children to serve God. We might even say, as I've heard some say, we want our children to serve God as we do. And I love the statement, but there again, you have to work on that statement a little bit. What if our children serve God just as we do? What does that look like? I mean, really. What does that look like? What if they serve God just as well as we do? What if they're just as dedicated as we are? What if they love the Lord just as much as we do? You can play that two ways, right? Can they see in us, and what would they say of us? Are there those, would our children grow up saying and looking at us, they have been with Jesus? That is their reflection, that is what they see in us, that they have been with Jesus. I hope that's what would be said. There are some things more important in this life than other things. I think this is one of the greatest challenges that we face in trying to sort that out. The idea of setting these priorities. And we can easily get busy with things that really seem important and certainly do have a place. But do we sometimes miss the greater thing? It's easy to let life steal our focus from what is most critical. And that is not to say that we're doing something wrong necessarily or something bad, but just that we are not focusing on the greater thing. We don't have to do something wrong. Again, it's about focusing on what is greater. Do we have the right focus on what is most important? And is that what we are teaching our children? Let's go to Luke chapter 10. Luke chapter 10. We have a couple of ladies here that we might be familiar with. These are the sisters of Lazarus, and they were all friends of Jesus. And here's an occasion where Jesus is with them. I take this to be in Bethany at their house. Jesus was there. Luke chapter 10, verse 38. And now it came to pass, as they went, that he entered a certain village, and a certain woman named Martha received him to her house. And she had a sister called Mary, who also sat at Jesus' feet and heard his word. But Martha was distracted with much serving, and she came to him and said, Lord, do you not care that my sister has left me to serve alone? Therefore tell her to help me. And Jesus answered and said to her, Martha, Martha, you are worried and troubled about many things, but one thing is needed, and Mary has chosen that good part, which will not be taken away from her. So what is that about? I mean, serving is not a bad thing. Jesus spent a lot of time talking about serving, demonstrating that, and talking about it. Serving is not a bad thing. But here, Martha was caring for the needs of others. That's a good thing. But Mary chose something better. She was sitting at the feet of Jesus, listening to the things that he said. Some things are better. And when we're making choices in life about things we should do, where we should go, activities that are important to us, let's understand that there are some things better. And we want our children to see what is better, to be able to identify what is of the greatest importance. And to our children, we need to show and demonstrate that kind of discernment. We want our children to learn what is most important. We better understand what is most important. And we better be making those priorities in our lives, demonstrating that to them. Sometimes there are challenges that we have on our time and on our thinking that just seem to be overwhelming. And we don't always have the opportunity to sit down and to tell and to teach our children everything. Sometimes we just need to show. But we hope there are those times when they are sitting at our feet as we talk about what is most important. And we tell them about Jesus. Too often our time is challenged and we have little of it left to give to study and to reading. And time to read with our children and talk about Bible issues and Bible stories is so important, and to make sure that they are being taught and prepared in the things that the Lord would say. And it takes time. And I know sometimes we are so challenged with our time. And we might not spend the time with our children in those things, in the right things, in what is greater. We might miss those opportunities. Being here today is the right choice. Being here today where we can worship together and our children can be here and see us worship and learn to worship with us is the right choice. And it's where we need to be. But it's hard to prioritize that sometimes. And then Bible classes before this, or Bible classes on Wednesday night. Let's face it. Wednesday nights are hard. I mean, particularly Wednesday nights are hard. Kids have been at school all day. Parents have been at work all day. There are issues of life to face and to deal with. And sometimes we just want to eat supper and sit down and watch a movie and not say anything to anyone. But it's Wednesday night. And what choice are we going to make? What priorities are we going to demonstrate to our children? And if we are the teacher to our children, what are they seeing and hearing from us when we make those choices? You know, I want to say something to our parents, especially those with young children. You know, we are so incredibly blessed here with so many children. It is a blessing. And it's a little bit overwhelming sometimes, too, when we think about responsibilities of parents and even what collective responsibility we have of being examples to them and trying to teach them in classes and things as that. But what a blessing it is that I hope we do not take for granted the children that we have here and the appreciation I have for mamas and daddies who are here and have their children here. I know it's not easy. It's not easy. And when our children make noise and we get embarrassed about that, and what do? And I want to commend you. There are times children make some noise and have to be taken out and issues addressed, I hope, and then brought back in. And parents here have been so incredibly good about that. And I guess I want to give some reassurance to parents that your kid sounds a whole lot louder to you than it does to me. It may be disturbing to you, but seldom is it disturbing to me. Let me tell you something that was really disturbing. A while back, I was away preaching somewhere. It was a smaller church, and the demographics were very different than ours. And I got up to preach the first time, and I'm halfway through the sermon, and I'm just going to tell you, I was struggling. I mean, I could not figure out what was wrong with this sermon or what was wrong with me, but I just felt like this is not going well. Can I just hit that redo button and we start this all over again? I mean, it felt that bad. Now, I've been preaching 3 or 4 years now, and that was one of the worst experiences I felt. I just felt like it was going so bad, and it took me halfway through the sermon to figure out what rattled me, because something had rattled me. And it was the absolute silence. Do you think this is quiet right now? I can hear you breathing. I was wondering if there was life. It was so quiet. And I guess what I'm saying with that, what a blessing it is to have children. What a blessing it is to sometimes have some children act out and have to be carried out and addressed and dealt with and brought back in. And parents, I'm good with that. It's okay. You've got them here. That's where they need to be, with you. We have so many opportunities here at Taylor's to have children involved in good Bible teaching. Bible classes twice a week, Sunday and Wednesday. Good classes. Take advantage of the opportunity for them to be taught. It does not replace what you're doing at home. It's meant to complement the teaching that you're doing at home. And then, not only classes on Sunday and Wednesday, but there's the monthly studies for the kids, in someone's house. Every month that's going on. And then we have the bucks and the does, as we call them, our young kids, a teaching and training that's going on this afternoon, helping them to learn some good attitudes of service and add to godly character. VBS coming up in a couple of months. So many opportunities. We sent out a schedule for some singings at our house here just recently. And it was really, really hard to pick out some dates that we could do that on. We have some things in our own personal schedule going on, and you have to try to miss the bucks and the does and who's coming for dinner on Saturday night, and try to work around all those things to find a Sunday night that, at least as best we can see, is maybe a clear night that we can do a singing. What an incredible problem to have, right? That we have to work to find another day, a time where we can get together again, because there are so many opportunities. And so parents, look, are you taking advantage of that? We want our children to serve God. And sometimes I've heard some parents say, I want them to serve God just as we do. It can be taken two ways. That could be a good thing. Or it could be not so good. Because we are the ones that have to be leading the way. We have to be demonstrating what that is. We read from Deuteronomy 4 at the beginning of service, and Deuteronomy 6 kind of parallels some things that are being said that we need to be teaching our children when we sit at home, when we walk along the road, when we lie down, and when we get up. We better be teaching our children, because when they're not with us, everything that they're hearing outside is drawing them away. We need to be busy drawing them to the Lord. And that's our opportunity, teaching and training the heart and the mind. Romans chapter 12, we'll close with this passage. Romans chapter 12. It's a plea of the Apostle Paul to the disciples in Rome. These are to ones who have already made a choice, a decision to walk with the Lord. These are baptized believers in Jesus Christ. Acts chapter 6 would tell us. And yet he is still appealing to them to strengthen their relationship with God. He says this in verse 1, I beseech you therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies a living sacrifice, holy, acceptable to God, which is your reasonable service. And do not be conformed to the world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God. That is the charge to every one of us as disciples of Jesus. To give ourselves in godly service, to render ourselves to Jesus, to the King, to the Master Teacher, to be followers of Him, to develop our lives in such a way that He can see, that God can see Jesus in us, and so can others, and so will our children. And that's what we need to do. Are you a disciple of Jesus? Baptized into Christ for remission of sins? Are you a disciple who has stumbled along the way and needs prayer and encouragement from brethren? Can we help you in some way? Would you respond to this invitation as we stand and sing?